The arrest of Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's long-standing and controversial president, sent shockwaves across the globe, challenging the very foundation of what many believe to be untouchable: presidential immunity. For decades, leaders around the world, from autocrats to democratically elected officials, operated under the assumption that their office provided them with near immunity from prosecution. Diplomats, policymakers, and political theorists have long debated whether heads of state could be held accountable without destabilizing international order. Yet, the recent developments in Venezuela have shattered this notion completely, forcing a reevaluation of legal frameworks that were previously considered sacrosanct. Maduro's political career was built on a combination of populism, control of state institutions, and exploitation of Venezuela's vast oil wealth. Under his leadership, the nation experienced unprecedented economic collapse, hyperinflation, and a humanitarian crisis that sent millions fleeing across borders. Despite widespread condemnation and mounting evidence of corruption, human rights abuses, and economic mismanagement, Maduro remained insulated by the idea that, as president, he could not be touched by domestic or international legal mechanisms. This sense of untouchability was the cornerstone of his strategy to consolidate power, maintain loyalty among security forces, and suppress dissent. But all of that changed the moment his arrest became a reality. The operation that led to Maduro's capture was meticulously planned, involving intelligence agencies, local opposition forces, and international coordination. Unlike previous attempts to hold sitting presidents accountable, this arrest bypassed the usual diplomatic roadblocks, exposing the vulnerabilities inherent in presidential immunity. Experts note that Maduro's detention illustrates a critical point. No office, no matter how powerful, guarantees protection from legal consequences if the political and operational environment aligns against the leader. This event is unprecedented in modern Latin American history and is likely to have far-reaching implications for political leaders worldwide. One of the most immediate consequences of Maduro's arrest is the chilling effect it creates for sitting presidents and other high-ranking officials. Historically, many leaders have engaged in illicit or authoritarian practices under the assumption that their position offered de facto immunity. From embezzlement to human rights violations, a sense of invincibility has often emboldened leaders to act without fear of accountability. The Venezuelan precedent now signals a sharp departure from this norm. Political analysts argue that even powerful leaders in established democracies may now face increased scrutiny, as the Maduro case demonstrates that legal and operational avenues exist to circumvent traditional protections. The international reaction to Maduro's arrest has been a mixture of shock, approval, and cautious optimism. Governments that have long criticized Venezuela's administration for corruption and repression view this as a validation of international law and human rights enforcement. However, critics warn that such actions must be handled carefully to avoid setting dangerous precedents. While removing a tyrannical leader can seem like a triumph of justice, the mechanisms used must be transparent and legally defensible to prevent accusations of extrajudicial actions. In this delicate balance, the world witnesses a transformation of political accountability. Power alone no longer guarantees immunity from the consequences of unlawful or unethical governance. Furthermore, Maduro's detention raises profound questions about the stability of political systems worldwide. If one sitting leader can be arrested under exceptional circumstances, what stops others from being similarly challenged? Will nations strengthen their internal security apparatuses to shield leaders? Or will international law evolve to make such arrests more common? These questions strike at the heart of global governance, challenging the assumptions of state sovereignty, the sanctity of the executive office, and the limits of political power. Scholars and policymakers are now tasked with reassessing the boundaries of presidential authority in a world where accountability can transcend national borders. The impact on Venezuela itself cannot be overstated. Domestically, Maduro's arrest has created a power vacuum, igniting uncertainty and competition among political factions. While some see this as an opportunity for democratic reform and stabilization, others fear the rise of authoritarian successors exploiting the chaos. Economically, markets are responding cautiously, aware that the country's oil industry, long a source of both wealth and corruption, may experience further disruption. Socially, the Venezuelan population grapples with a complex reality, hope for justice mixed with anxiety over what comes next. In essence, the arrest is a turning point not only for the individual, but for the nation as a whole, illustrating the tangible consequences of dismantling the myth of invulnerability. Historically, presidential immunity was seen as both a shield and a responsibility. Leaders were expected to act in the nation's best interest, with the understanding that legal scrutiny would occur only after their term. Maduro's arrest redefines this paradigm, suggesting that immunity is not absolute and can be challenged under extreme circumstances. This sets a precedent with global ramifications. From Africa to Asia, Latin America to Europe, sitting leaders are now under renewed pressure to govern within legal and ethical boundaries, knowing that their actions could carry immediate repercussions. In addition to legal implications, the arrest has profound symbolic power. It sends a message that accountability is not theoretical, it is actionable. For opposition movements and civil society groups worldwide, this event provides a blueprint for challenging entrenched power structures. The psychological impact on both leaders and populations is significant. The era of untouchable executives may be over. In this sense, Maduro's fall is not merely a political event. It is a cultural and institutional shockwave, reshaping the expectations and limits of leadership. Finally, the arrest underscores the evolving role of international cooperation in enforcing accountability. In an increasingly interconnected world, national borders are no longer absolute barriers against legal action. Intelligence sharing, coordinated diplomacy, and strategic operations have demonstrated that even the highest offices can be penetrated if the global will is aligned. This evolution challenges traditional notions of sovereignty and immunity, and signals a new era where legal and political mechanisms operate in tandem to uphold justice. While Part 1 explored the immediate shockwaves of Nicolás Maduro's arrest, Part 2 delves deeper into the international ramifications and the subtle, long-term consequences for political leaders around the world. The unprecedented nature of this event has forced governments, legal experts, and global institutions to confront a reality many had never seriously considered. A sitting president is no longer untouchable. This is more than a momentary disruption. It is a tectonic shift in political norms that will reverberate far beyond Venezuela's borders. One of the most critical implications of Maduro's detention is the redefinition of state sovereignty in the context of executive accountability. Traditionally, the concept of sovereignty has shielded leaders from foreign intervention, allowing them to govern without fear of external legal repercussions. Maduro's arrest, however, challenges this long-standing assumption. By coordinating with international actors, opposition forces, and intelligence agencies, the operation demonstrated that sovereignty is not an absolute shield when the global community perceives gross violations of law and human rights. For decades, leaders operating with impunity relied on these protective barriers. Now, they face a world where their actions are subject to scrutiny and consequences beyond national borders. The legal mechanisms involved in Maduro's arrest also mark a historic evolution in international law. While the International Criminal Court and other tribunals have prosecuted former leaders, few cases have succeeded in apprehending a sitting president outside the context of a war crimes scenario. Maduro's arrest circumvents traditional diplomatic immunity through a combination of domestic legal rulings, strategic international cooperation, and operational precision. Legal experts argue that this case sets a precedent. Immunity may be conditional, and actions that severely breach national or international law can trigger exceptional enforcement measures. This development signals to current and future leaders that office alone does not guarantee safety from justice. Another consequence of the arrest is the erosion of the psychological security that presidential immunity provides. Leaders, particularly those in authoritarian regimes, often operate under the belief that they are untouchable, emboldened to take extreme measures without fear of accountability. This belief shapes domestic policy, foreign relations, and personal behavior. The fall of Maduro sends a clear signal. The era of invincibility is over. For sitting leaders worldwide, this represents a new strategic consideration. Every decision, financial, political, or military, now carries the potential for immediate consequences, creating a layer of accountability that transcends traditional governance structures. The arrest also exposes the vulnerabilities of autocratic networks that rely heavily on loyalty and control, rather than institutional stability. Maduro's regime depended on the support of the military, intelligence agencies, and bureaucratic elites to maintain his grip on power. By demonstrating that external forces could penetrate these networks and neutralize the leader, the operation highlights the fragility of systems built on personal loyalty rather than resilient institutions. Political strategists note that this has implications not only for Venezuela, but for any state where power is centralized in a single executive figure. The lesson is clear. Concentrated power is increasingly a liability, not a shield. International reactions have varied, reflecting the complexity of balancing justice, diplomacy, and strategic interests. Western democracies, long critical of Maduro's regime, heralded the arrest as a victory for accountability. Human rights organizations and activists similarly celebrated the event as a landmark moment, illustrating that even powerful leaders can be held responsible for egregious abuses. However, other nations express concern over the potential precedent this sets. Some argue that similar actions could be misused for political gain, destabilizing regions under the guise of legal enforcement. The tension between moral imperative and geopolitical caution underscores the transformative nature of this moment. It is both a triumph of accountability and a challenge to the international status quo. Domestically, the repercussions for Venezuela's political landscape are profound. The removal of Maduro creates a vacuum, igniting both hope and uncertainty. Opposition factions must navigate a complex terrain, balancing immediate governance with the long-term goal of institutional reform. Meanwhile, loyalists and remaining power brokers may attempt to consolidate influence, potentially sparking internal conflict. The delicate task of rebuilding institutions, stabilizing the economy, and ensuring social cohesion now falls to those who must operate in the shadow of Maduro's dramatic fall. The arrest is not an endpoint. It is a catalyst for transformation, demanding careful strategy and international support to prevent chaos. Economic implications are equally significant. Venezuela's oil sector, long a pillar of both wealth and corruption, faces new scrutiny. Investors, analysts, and global markets are watching closely, attempting to predict the trajectory of a nation in flux. Maduro's arrest raises questions about contract legitimacy, resource management, and future political risk. Oil-dependent nations and multinational corporations may need to reassess strategies, while financial institutions examine the legal implications of engaging with a country undergoing sudden political upheaval. In essence, the arrest does not merely affect political narratives, it has immediate material consequences with global economic resonance. Beyond politics and economics, the psychological impact of Maduro's arrest on global leadership culture cannot be overstated. For decades, the notion of untouchable executives shaped not only the behavior of autocrats, but also the expectations of the populations they governed. Ordinary citizens, long accustomed to the impunity of their leaders, may now view accountability as achievable, fundamentally altering the social contract between rulers and the ruled. Civil society movements gain unprecedented moral leverage, emboldened by the realization that leadership is subject to real-world consequences. The cultural shift alone may have ripple effects, influencing governance norms in countries far removed from Venezuela. Maduro's detention also redefines strategic calculations for both allies and adversaries. Nations historically allied with autocratic leaders must now consider the risks of association, while opposition movements in other regions may view international cooperation as a viable pathway to challenge entrenched regimes. The operation demonstrates that intelligence, diplomacy, and targeted action can converge effectively, even against seemingly invincible leaders. This multifaceted approach provides a blueprint for future political interventions, raising the stakes for leaders who previously assumed that their office provided ultimate protection. The dramatic arrest of Nicolás Maduro has not only reshaped Venezuela's political landscape, but has also sent a powerful signal to the world. Presidential immunity is no longer absolute. Part 3 delves into the intricate mechanisms behind Maduro's capture, the broader geopolitical consequences, and the lessons political leaders and citizens worldwide can draw from this unprecedented event. The arrest, in many ways, represents a blueprint for challenging entrenched authoritarianism and a reminder that no leader, regardless of office, is beyond accountability. At the operational level, Maduro's arrest was a highly coordinated effort involving multiple layers of intelligence, domestic opposition, and international cooperation. It was not a spontaneous or isolated event. Years of observation, strategy, and legal groundwork culminated in a precise operation that neutralized Maduro's protective networks. For decades, authoritarian leaders like Maduro relied heavily on loyal security forces, complex bureaucracies, and the assumption of legal invulnerability to maintain power. However, this operation demonstrated that a combination of political will, intelligence coordination, and legal legitimacy can successfully penetrate even the most fortified leadership structures. From a geopolitical perspective, the arrest of Maduro has rippled far beyond Venezuela. Latin America, historically characterized by political instability and fluctuating power balances, now faces a new reality. Governments in the region must reassess alliances and anticipate shifts in influence as the removal of a dominant figure alters both economic and political dynamics. Neighboring countries that have historically maintained cautious neutrality now find themselves grappling with questions about border security, migration, and the redistribution of resources. Furthermore, global powers, particularly the United States, European nations, and China, must evaluate how their foreign policies may be influenced by this precedent. The implications are vast. A single arrest can redefine regional and global power equations. Legally, Maduro's detention represents a seismic shift in the interpretation and enforcement of presidential immunity. Historically, immunity served as both a safeguard and a barrier, protecting leaders from prosecution during their term, while theoretically promoting stable governance. The Venezuelan precedent challenges this assumption. By successfully arresting a sitting president without triggering a full-blown international conflict, legal scholars now have a real-world case to examine. This could influence the drafting of future international agreements, the restructuring of domestic laws regarding executive accountability, and the refinement of protocols that balance sovereignty with justice. In essence, Maduro's fall provides both a practical example and a philosophical challenge. The office of the presidency does not grant impunity from legal and ethical obligations. Domestically, Venezuela faces an uncertain path forward. The removal of Maduro has created a vacuum that may encourage both reform and chaos. Opposition factions now have the opportunity to build more transparent institutions, but they also face the risk of infighting and potential exploitation by remaining loyalist elements. Social and economic recovery, long stunted under Maduro's rule, requires careful and strategic planning. Analysts warn that the immediate aftermath of such a high-profile arrest can bring instability if governance structures are not strengthened quickly. Yet, at the same time, the potential for long-term positive change is significant. Civil society now has an unprecedented opportunity to influence governance, demand accountability, and foster a political culture that prioritizes justice over authoritarian protection. Economically, the arrest has immediate and far-reaching consequences. Venezuela's oil sector, which has been both a source of immense wealth and rampant corruption, is undergoing a period of intense scrutiny. Investors and multinational corporations must navigate the uncertainties associated with political transition, contract legitimacy, and the risk of sudden regulatory shifts. Markets worldwide are observing carefully, recognizing that a change in leadership, even under extraordinary circumstances, can have ripple effects in global energy supply, financial stability, and commodity pricing. For countries dependent on Venezuelan oil, this creates both challenges and opportunities, reshaping long-term strategic planning in the energy sector. One of the most significant lessons from Maduro's arrest lies in its psychological and symbolic power. Leaders across the globe, particularly those operating with authoritarian tendencies, are confronted with the stark reality that their office no longer guarantees safety from scrutiny or consequence. This realization may force a recalibration of how power is exercised, with increased caution in decision-making and governance. Simultaneously, for the populations living under such regimes, the arrest serves as a tangible example of accountability. It reinforces the idea that leadership is not a license for impunity, and that collective action, strategic planning, and legal frameworks can challenge even the most entrenched power structures. Internationally, the event is being analyzed as a potential model for similar interventions in the future. Governments, non-governmental organizations, and multilateral institutions are examining the legal justifications, operational strategies, and political conditions that made Maduro's arrest possible. While some caution against normalizing extraterritorial actions, the event undeniably demonstrates that coordination, legitimacy, and timing can converge to hold leaders accountable. This could encourage other nations to consider proactive strategies for preventing abuses of power while balancing respect for sovereignty and international norms. In this way, Maduro ES detention represents both a warning to potential abusers of power and a strategic guide for those committed to justice. As Venezuela navigates the post-Maduro era, one of the most crucial outcomes is the potential redefinition of the social contract between leaders and citizens. Generations of Venezuelans have experienced political oppression, economic hardship, and social instability under a system where presidential immunity effectively shielded leadership from accountability. The arrest creates an opportunity to redefine the expectations of governance, emphasizing transparency, responsibility, and the enforceability of the law. For activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens, this moment represents both a historic victory and a responsibility to ensure that systemic reform is implemented and sustained. The arrest also underscores the evolving nature of power in the 21st century. In a hyper-connected, globalized world, leaders are increasingly subject to both domestic and international scrutiny. Social media, intelligence sharing, and multilateral cooperation mean that decisions are no longer insulated by geography or bureaucracy. Maduro's fall is a clear illustration of this reality. Accountability is no longer a delayed or theoretical concept, but a real, actionable possibility. This challenges leaders worldwide to govern with heightened awareness of both legal and ethical responsibilities, while also compelling the international community to adapt to a new landscape of political enforcement. Finally, as we conclude Part 3 and this segment of the series, the arrest of Nicolás Maduro is more than a sensational headline. It is a watershed moment in global politics. It destroys the myth of invulnerability for presidents, recalibrates the expectations of political accountability, and establishes a precedent that will influence both governance and international law for decades to come. Leaders, citizens, and policymakers must now grapple with a new reality. Power alone does not protect against consequence, and justice can, under the right conditions, reach even the highest offices in the world. If you found this exploration eye-opening and want to see more in-depth analyses of global political shifts, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the final part of this series. In Part 4, we'll examine the long-term consequences for global governance, the future of presidential immunity, and what this historic moment means for the balance of power worldwide.